Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Arndt. With me again, as usual, is the astronomer turned brewer. If we ever find beer on the outer planets, this man will be brought in as an expert to talk on television. Bobby Fleischman, how are you doing, sir?
Fantastic.
And with us, we got a brand new guest to the show to talk about the psychology of beer, Eric Eastman.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
Introduce yourself. Tell us your bona fides and all about your podcast.
All right. My name is Eric Eastman. I am a psychology teacher. I host a podcast called MysterE's, M-Y-S-T-E-R, capital E apostrophe S. So a little play on words there, really clever. That's about as clever as I get. And it's about all things psychology related. It's driven towards parents, adults, but also teenagers. So unfortunately, I can't do a lot of conversations about beer on that podcast. So that's why I'm pretty excited to talk about the psychology of beer today.
So on this show, I would say we've taken an intellectual approach to beer. We talked about the physics. We've talked about the chemistry. We've talked about the economics. We've talked about marketing. We've talked about history. So in this episode, we want to talk about psychology beyond simply getting hammered and how that impairs your judgment. So why don't you start out how does psychology come into play when you're talking about beer and brewing?
Oh my gosh, there are so many aspects that we could dive into. Probably the first and foremost that I'm pretty fascinated with is a concept called mere exposure effect. That's one that kind of drives many people to stick with what they love. You've heard that expression many, many times that, this is the beer I like. This is a beer that I enjoy. Typically, the beer that people like the most, that people enjoy the most, is the ones that they're most familiar with, the ones that they have been exposed to the most, the ones that they drink the most. And they become so familiarized with that, they just enjoy it more and more. If you have little kids out there, as I know Bobby does, we have a 3-bite rule in our house. When a child first takes a bite of a new food, they're not going to like it. No matter what, it's almost impossible for them to like that first bite. And that's because it is unfamiliar. But you give them 2 or 3 bites, 4 bites, 5 bites, and they become more familiar with the flavor, the texture, etc. Then they start to enjoy it. It's the same thing with us and beer. The more we're exposed to one type of beer, the more we like it, whether it's Pilsners or IPAs or lagers or whatever the case may be.
I remember I was traveling. I spent a little over a week in Aqaba, Jordan, and I went to the same restaurant every day. Within 3 days, I developed a routine. I was ordering the same dish every time I went there, and they knew what I was going to order like by 3 or 4 days. And in hindsight, I looked back on that and was like, why did I do that? Why wasn't I trying other things on the menu? It's like, well, I liked what I ordered. It was simple. It was like shawarma, fries, and hummus. And that was it. And instead of ketchup, I had the hummus, and I just kept ordering it over and over. And we've talked on this podcast before about how there always were local beers. In this community, we had Adler Brau. Every community seemed to have a beer. And people, I think, developed those regional loyalties. That's what they drank. I remember growing up, my next door neighbor, his dad drank Point all the time. Point beer from Stevens Point,
Not
Wisconsin.
a bad beer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So why are people drawn to the same thing over and over?
Yep. So that's a great question. So there's a lot of principles based off of Gestaltism where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And one of those pieces is that we drift towards things that are proximal, things that are within proximity to us. So our first partners are typically our neighbors. They're people that live close to us. They're people that we see every day. It's the same with beer. If you are in Northern California, you're oftentimes going to be driven towards, at least I'm going to be driven towards a West Coast IPA. And you not only have that mere exposure effect, but you also have that proximity, that nearness, that closeness, and you just naturally gravitate towards what is available to you. So it is really just a matter of where you live, how close these different types of beers are to you.
I was gonna say, what can you say about the customer that never tries the same thing twice? What about that person? What psychologically, what's going on there that they can't find something that they come back to every day?
I don't know. What do you? So you know a whole lot more about beer than I do. Do you think there are obviously people that have greater complex palates, but do you think they're also more likely to be healthy risk takers?
Right. Yeah. I think that's the other side of this coin, right? Everyone can't just be following everybody. There has to be someone leading and exploring. And yeah, it's a personality type on some level.
Yeah, for
Yep.
sure. Yeah, there are definitely people that break that mold of mere exposure.
Right.
Just like there's the expression of birds of a feather flock together, where you typically actually partner up with somebody that is similar to you, right?
Right.
But there are those that end up, partnering up with the whole phrase opposites attract. I think it would be the same where the majority of the population drift towards things that they're familiar with, things that they have been exposed to throughout their life. But there are going to be those outliers that are our explorers.
Right.
I think, and yeah, I think what that really comes down to, my guess is they're probably just they're more willing to take healthy risks.
And I think it's generational from the beer standpoint. I think we're seeing 20 to 25-year-olds they're really difficult to pin down as far as marketing and demographic studies go. We can't find something that catches their attention for more than 5 minutes from the beer side, and maybe that way in everything at this point.
So you want to hear my theory? And this is a theory developed over like a long time traveling. There are roughly two types of people. There's cosmopolitan people and parochial people. I have an aunt who will not eat Mexican food. She will not eat Chinese food. She will not eat anything. She will only eat the type of food she grew up with. My mom, bless her soul, never traveled anywhere, but she's willing to go to any restaurant in the area. We have taken her to Indian restaurants, Thai restaurants. She's open to these new things. And I think there are some people that are not only open, but they prefer things because they're different and new, right? They will poo-poo the things that, everyone else consumes. They will go for the different and the novel and the unique and the exotic.
More comfortable exploring.
And they're not just exploring, but they feel that somehow the different is superior, right?
Yeah.
But then there are people who are not interested in that. And these are the people that you were talking about. This is what they know. This is what they're comfortable with. They have no desire to try anything else out, and they're kind of suspect of it.
Right.
Absolutely. I think both points are so incredibly powerful. So I've studied a lot the last 15, 20 years, teenage brain, as well as since 2012, I've done a lot of studying on social media and smartphones. And with the advent of the internet and so many different things being at our fingertips, that this generation, this 20 to 25-year-old cohort, they have been just generally exposed to so much more. I think the ones that would walk into this establishment are going to be more likely the risk takers, as opposed to the ones that are going to go to the typical kind of the hot spot where you're going to get the typical domestic beers.
Right.
So they're going to probably just in general be more of those explorers type of deal. But they're going to be so much more exposed to so many more brands and so much more exposure just via social media, where it was virtually word of mouth in our generation. It was just whatever was next door. Like Sprecher down in Milwaukee was like this artisan, like it might as well have been from Germany. Like it was just from a different world, even though it was 90 miles away, but that was 30 years ago. So I think that does play a big role. And I mean, you both know this better than anybody. What are there, 9,000 breweries right now? Is that right?
Yeah, it's
And
not quite 10, but yeah.
And 30 years ago, how many were there?
Oh,
Less.
yeah, I think 2,000,
Okay.
somewhere in that neighborhood.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just that mirror, that availability of that exposure to so many more different brands, I think that plays a pretty big role with a lot of
Yeah,
our
and there's the
newbies.
fear of missing out, and they thumb
Oh, yeah,
scroll and
little
they
FOMO.
see, so they're always
Mhm.
trying to keep up with whatever their friends are doing, and yeah.
I can always tell if I'm sitting at the bar down here what people order. Like, you obviously can't read too much into it, but when someone orders a triple debauchery or they order a tall mast, they very clearly know something, they've tried it, that there's a reason for them doing it. I don't think they just picked it from random.
Right.
And I've also been sitting there and I've seen people say, what's the closest thing you have to Bud Light?
Right.
And
That,
again,
that's the people that prefer the comfort zone.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we know certain bartenders, they push certain beers. Uh, um, but when they do, they have such tremendous passion and energy for it that it turns people on to those, and they're actually much more likely to have a really good experience with that beer. So you just think of it that's just like a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Right.
and that is so much of this experience.
We always say that we can only do so much with the liquid in the glass, and it depends on the environment in which the person consumes that beer, their response to it, and how much they
So-
like it. Yeah.
Let me move on to another. You can provide the name for this psychological phenomenon. I think I brought this up on the podcast. I was in the nation of Samoa, and they have a brewery there called Vailima. And I had a Vailima, and I remember tasting it and thinking, this is the best beer I've ever had in my life. But I look back on that now, and I wonder, is that really the best beer I ever had? Is the best beer really on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Or was it the fact that this was a cold beer, that I was sitting on a beach, at sunset, and all this came into play?
I call this the Bachelor or the Bachelorette effect. So, okay, bear with me. All right, so you have on the Bachelor or the Bachelorette, right? You have these people that are vying and competing for the love of this one person. So their heart rate is jacked up, and they're flush, and they're sweating, and they're nervous, and they have all this fight or flight energy, right? And they confuse it with love. That's what they do. You're on this Pacific island in the middle of, oh my gosh, look at this place. And you have this cold beer in front of you, and you're like, it can't get any better than this. And so what you have done then is you have connected, you have tied the beer with all of these other emotions and feelings and visuals that you've had, and you connect those all together, and then you fall in love with the beer like all of these people fall in love with the Bachelor and the Bachelorette.
We Allison and I went on a hiking trip and camping trip in Big Bend in West Texas, a national park. Made it to the top of this mountain, and it must have dropped to 20 degrees that night, and we cracked open a can of corned beef and hash or whatever. It was the most disgusting thing objectively, but in the moment, it might as well have been a 5-star presentation, and we'll never forget how awesome it tasted. But we agree we'll never drink or eat this again out of this moment.
The Romans had a saying, I think it was the Romans, that hunger is the greatest seasoning.
Right? Exactly.
Oh.
You need nothing other than that.
For sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you even think about like a great bottle of wine that you have at a restaurant. You're not paying for the bottle of wine.
Right.
You even mentioned it. You can only do so much with the liquid.
Right.
You're not paying for the wine. You're paying for the experience. And not only are you paying for the experience, but the experience is going to determine what that wine tastes like to you. It really is kind of driven by that, from the presentation, and the presentation is just a show to get you all jacked up, from that presentation to, and honestly, bear with me here, there you had mentioned that you've done podcasts on marketing. Well, there has been research done on the weight of glasses.
Mm.
So it's not just the shape, right?
Yeah.
As you lift,
Pretty light. We're all drinking beer here, by the way.
yeah, exactly. But as you drink a glass, it tastes significantly better, whether it's beer, wine, a liquor, whatever. It tastes significantly better psychologically when it is in a heavier glass. So all of those things can play a role in a person's experience, and this is like I don't mean to be a psychology geek, but this is like how I live my life. I think about this shit all the time, like 24/7, like how psychology is playing a role in our experiences. And it is It's so 100% true.
We should pull the curtains back and say that we always record somewhere near 10 o'clock on a Saturday, 10 a.m. on a Saturday. And here we are on a Wednesday recording at 8 o'clock
8 p.m. Not 8 a.m. 8
So,
p.m.
so it's a whole different context. Even it's pertinent to the conversation right now.
Yeah, for
We're
sure.
in a different mindset than we normally are in other times of day.
For sure. When does a Bloody Mary taste best? At 10 at night or at brunch?
Right.
You know, it's a no-brainer.
Right.
You know.
All right, I want to make another. This is a stretch. Okay, Pavlov's dog. If you're not familiar with the story, Pavlov.
Yeah,
I don't know
Ivan
the guy.
Pavlov. Yeah.
So he would ring a bell. Dogs would salivate. He'd give them a treat, and eventually, simply ringing the bell would make them salivate.
Are we talking about 547 or?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why I said this is kind of a stretch.
No.
So Joel, the historian, has been on several of these episodes, literally got you guys to install a bell such that when anyone orders a 547, he rings the bell. How does that play into the psychology?
Yeah, so that's just another example of associative learning. So if I were to give you, so this is where psychology is so cool, and I'll connect it with 547 in a minute. But this is what psychologists do, and the difference that psychologists make. You know, so many people think of psychology as a pseudoscience, but it is so driven by not us at this table, but many people.
I think it's a pseudoscience.
I bet you do. Anyway, so it's actually changed the way they've done chemotherapy with cancer patients. Psychologists have, because what they noticed is that when people would take a certain route to the doctor's office, they would start feeling sick before the chemotherapy even happened. Because what it is, it's called associative learning. They associate the drive with the chemotherapy that gets them sick. So all of a sudden, the drive is already making them sick. So the whole doing chemotherapy at home type of deal is not only because of the convenience of it, but it's also because of the comfort of not having that association with negativity, where you associate even the getting into the car, driving a certain route, to going to the clinic and having chemotherapy done and then being sick from the chemotherapy. They first started telling people to take different routes to get chemotherapy done. And then all of a sudden they shifted to doing chemotherapy in other locations, including at people's houses. So it's actually incredibly powerful. I'm driving towards McFleshman's and I'm already starting to drool, because I associate State Street with a 547. And so when Joel Herm rings that bell is associated with the 547 that I see, I smell, I drink, I drool, right? And then all of a sudden, all it takes is the bell for me to be drooling all over the place.
There's this whole field of food sciences, sensory science is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to objectively look at each batch of beer we make and determine whether it is or is not within spec. And you would think that would be trivial. It's not, because you have to take this person, this human being, and have them taste this beer objectively. But to make it objective, you have to remove all the bells in the background, by the way. You have to remove
I just started to drool.
you have to remove all of these variables, and it's non-trivial removing all of that.
So I have a big gigantic question to ask you, and either one of you. But so M&Ms peanuts specifically, they are designed by scientists and psychologists to get people to eat more and more and more, right? And people think it's because of the sweetness, but it's actually because of the lack of salt. There's just enough salt to get people excited and get people to want to have some, but it's not enough salt to satiate them. So they eat more and more. I'm wondering, has there been any science done on beer in driving people to not have quite enough of a hoppy flavor where they want to drink more and more? I'm wondering if you've heard anything about that.
Well, hops are only one piece of it. But
malt, hops.
I will say that the way to drink, I hate it when people drink samples, 5 ounces of a beer, and then it's okay that you do that, but I don't like that people do that and then make a full determination of whether they like that beer or not, because you need a full pint. You need to have the beginning and the long middle, and then the finish. You have to actually taste that beer after having consumed a full glass of it and sit with it before you can make that determination. where I'm going with that is you're designing beers, at least I am, from the back forward. I want the finish to be perfect. I want it to be like have all these things that you come together, but then dry up and make you thirsty. So it's designed for you to grab another beer, not to just say that, oh, I endured and I checked that off, untapped, and I'm moving on. It makes you thirsty. Oddly enough, you're creating a liquid that makes you thirsty. That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Excellent.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
super. That's
Right.
super fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
It plays right into that.
That goes into the whole thing about food science, I think, which is probably a whole different episode. But I don't think people realize the amount of thought that, especially for big brand products, that goes into even the smallest detail of what people consume, which probably isn't as big a factor in what you're doing, where it's more artisanal and you're just trying to, you don't have a team of people and a committee. It's just you trying to figure out what can be the best beer.
There's more than just me, but yeah, we're in the middle of those two worlds. Exactly. It's not just me, and it's not full committees and full sensory panels at this point.
That concludes part 1 of our interview with Eric Eastman of MysterE's. Join us next time. Until then, you can join us over on the Facebook group or support us over on Patreon. And please remember to respect the beer.